Political intrigue at the Illinois State Fair as it is Democrats' Day. And the Chicago Teachers Union is at an impasse with Chicago Public Schools over COVID-19. Sound like a broken record on that. That's all and more that we're going to talk about in our Spotlight Politics. And here with all of these items are Amanda Bezinski and Heather Sharon. Amanda, still without deep-fried Twinkie or Oreo unless you're holding it below the camera. So let's start out with the political maneuverings. You mentioned earlier in the show there's this traditional breakfast in the morning, and there were some notable absences, notably the governor and the House Speaker. Is there anything to read into about that?
The House Speaker, I mean, maybe he's evidently on vacation, so that happens, although this is always on the calendar, other than, of course, last year because of the pandemic when the entire fair was canceled. Also, the state Senate president, Don Harmon, he is recovering from what we're told is a mild case of the coronavirus, one of those breakthrough cases, as he was vaccinated. But sure, I mean, I think there's a lot of talk. You cannot ignore that Governor J.B. Pritzker wasn't there when there were an estimated 1,000 or so Democrats in attendance. This is a big deal, and it comes as there's a lot of talk of this rift because Pritzker supported Chicago Alderwoman Michelle Harris of the 8th Ward over Congresswoman Robin Kelly, and you're heading into an election cycle. So I think it perhaps shows something there. Again, the governor tried to say, hey, you are making a big deal out of nothing. I think in part what it really shows is that he's pretty confident. Granted, it's a ways out from the 22 election cycle, but he's pretty confident about his chances.
Well, and the official party apparatus is not going to not support Governor Pritzker in his reelection. Mentioned hundreds and hundreds of people in there, indoors, COVID, that might be a consideration too. The governor did show up later, and here's some of what he had to say to hype the crowd up at Governor's Day at the State Fair.
Thanks to all of you, wherever Democrats have put up a strong fight, we win. In 2018, we won the largest victory over an incumbent governor in a century. We won Democratic control of every statewide seat in Illinois.
So Heather, as we mentioned, this happens every year, especially in election years. It's the kickoff to campaign season. Is that the point here, to gin people up, to start getting people thinking about donating if that's their preferred party?
Absolutely. Although it's a little bit different this year because of the delay in the census figures. Typically, the primary would be in March. It's going to be in June of 2022, which means there's even more time for political intrigue and back and forth. Most of the focus is going to be on the Secretary of State's race. There are 4 candidates, all of whom were front and center today at the Illinois State Fair, jockeying for position, talking to reporters. And that's going to be really the marquee race until we know who the Republicans will nominate for governor, and then all eyes will be on the top of the ticket.
And Heather, I'm glad you brought up those maps and the census, because we had Illinois Republican Congressman Rodney Davis on just a little bit ago saying that if the Democrats indeed draw new maps and those maps make it tough for him to run for re-election in that district, he will think about running for governor. So Amanda, do you hear anything about whether that might be the case?
Well, there's a lot of talk about these maps, and in fact, we know that House Democrats have been surveyed as to whether they'll be able to come down to Springfield the week before Labor Day, and that would be ostensibly to perhaps vote on an energy package as negotiations continue on that, but also, yes, those maps. That census data is pretty fresh, so presumably people are still, the map makers are fooling around on their computer programs, but likely going in, they had some notion of what the census figures were going to be, and so, yes, they're going to take into consideration who they may want to run against J.B. Pritzker for governor, knowing that Rodney Davis is somebody who's oft mentioned and he hasn't flat out said no. So will they make it particularly easy for him to win again, sort of giving him a pass there at the governor's race? Or will they make this a race where he is going to have a tough go of it and a hard time making it back to Washington, in which case he might give Springfield over Washington a bigger consideration.
Amanda, I have to say, what you're saying is very interesting, but those spinning dogs behind you look like a whole lot of fun. And Amanda, I want to stick with you here because apparently Senator Durbin said something that might have given a clue as to what those maps would look like and whether or not Rodney Davis is going to sort of be mapped out when he said he might endorse a certain person to run against Rodney Davis. So explain that.
So that's Nikki Bezinski, and I am kind of curious as to why Senator Durbin would have let the cat out of the bag on that one. We know that she left a high-profile up there position with the White House. I mean, she was in Biden's finance office, and prior to that had been serving with the Pritzker administration. Nikki Bezinski is well thought of, high regarded in both Democratic D.C. circles as well as here in Springfield. But if they were floating her at all and she was hoping to make a big announcement that way, well, then this certainly disrupts that. I don't quite know how to gauge what that might mean for Rodney Davis, again, other than that she is somebody who is respected, certainly has a whole lot of ties and connections and would seemingly do well to do fundraising. Then again, I would say that ties to Governor Pritzker, he's not the most popular in downstate areas where what he frames as leadership on the coronavirus is not always very well taken. I think there are pockets certainly of that district where those Pritzker sucks signs are more prevalent than new ones unveiled that say Pritzker
I'll tell you,
rocks.
Amanda, Congressman Davis thought that it certainly was a sign that Durbin had floated that person's name again to potentially run against Davis in that district, which could go Davis to then run for governor. Heather, let's move to the city. You had a great story this week about alderperson Carole Austin and the committee that she chairs spending a whole lot of money but not really doing much. Tell us about that.
Well, her committee, the on contracting, oversight, and equity, only met 3 times in 2020, but managed to spend $200,000 while not meeting and doing much of anything in terms of substantive legislation. Her committee has also not met at all this year in 2021, and about 24 hours after our story published, she scheduled a hearing, the first one this entire calendar year, and what she's going to do is hold a subject matter hearing, so not a vote, but a hearing on efforts to extend the city's construction contract set-aside program, which is designed to ensure that firms owned by Black Chicagoans, Latino Chicagoans, Asian Chicagoans, and women get their fair share of the city's contract. It's a legally difficult program to make sure you've got all of the T's crossed and the I's dotted. And I still haven't been able to get a question answered from Mayor Lightfoot about why Alderman Austin still has this committee chairmanship, even as she faces an indictment on 4 federal charges of bribery and lying to the FBI.
Right, because Alderman Ed Burke lost his committee chairmanship when the news broke that he was indicted by the feds. Heather, I'll stay with you here. The Chicago Teachers Union says no deal right now on a return to class in a couple of weeks. Because of the COVID situation, are we going to see some kind of protracted battle here and are kids going to have to think about staying home?
Well, I think it's likely that school will start as scheduled on August 30th. A lot of the questions remain over when exactly students who are exposed to somebody who's COVID positive, when they'll have to quarantine, how long they'll have to quarantine, and what sort of remote educational system will be set up to make sure that those kids don't fall behind, especially for the ones who aren't sick but have to isolate. There are a lot of questions, and it comes, the start of school comes as the city is seeing a pretty significant and sustained surge of spread of COVID thanks to the Delta variant. Starting Friday, everyone in Chicago will have to wear a mask indoors, regardless of whether they're vaccinated or not. And that is a little bit of a mixed message the city is sending, saying, hey, you got to wear masks because COVID is spreading so fast, but also it's safe to send your kids back to school, even when students younger than 12 can't be vaccinated. So the teachers union has some questions.
And as Dr. Murphy said earlier in the program, that vaccination for kids 12 and under might be coming pretty soon. Amanda, last question for you, most important question. How did the butter cow look down there?
I haven't actually seen it yet. Alas, Paris, haven't gotten any great fair food, haven't really had time to stop by the Butter Cow, but there is an I Love 90s concert tonight. By the way, masks or COVID tests required, especially in certain areas, and that's featuring Vanilla Ice, Bone Thugs and Harmony, Tone Loc. So there you go. That's what's happening here in Springfield tonight, as well as, of course, folks going down the Giant Slide.
So, Amanda, are you going to rush over to the grandstand for that concert right when we're done here?
We'll see. I've got a little bit more work to finish up, and maybe all this talk about fried Oreos, I might have to head over there first.
All this working.
The fried what stand?
Work. And we're going to see you tomorrow talking about Republican Day. All right, my thanks to Heather Sharon and Amanda Bezinski.